Welcome back, you degenerate furries. I'm Caspasaurus. Let's talk about Digimon World DS. While I was playing through the game, I noticed plenty of similarities to Cyber Sleuth and a few to Digimon World 3. So other than this being a general review, I'll also draw some light comparisons between the three, as I think it'll be interesting to compare certain elements. If you've not seen my Cyber Sleuth or my Digimon World 3 videos, I highly recommend you check them out before you watch this, or certain talking points may be lost on you. I'll probably put links to all the other Digimon shit in the description, so go check them out. Digimon World DS came right after World 4, and up until this point, the West had not seen a fully 2D Digimon RPG. It seems that the entirety of this game took heavy inspiration from the 2D sections of Digimon World 3, and that's fantastic as those sprites are clean, charming, and well animated. It's unfortunate that Digimon World DS either didn't keep that style as an intentional choice, or simply wasn't able to due to the sheer number of monsters it features. While the total number of 2D monster sprites in the third entry was less than 10, Digimon World DS rocks well over 200 varied creatures, all with sprites that follow the protagonist. I will miss the fact that the Digimon run cycles no longer headbang and were replaced with generic 2-frame walk cycles, but in the name of over 200 extra usable characters, I'd say it was a worthy sacrifice. With that said, there's nothing wrong with the sprites in and of themselves. They do a great job representing the monsters. I simply have a particular preference for the sprites of old. The art style is basic and cartoony, which I think works perfectly for this type of game. There's very limited shading, but what little there is clearly defines shadows and edges, despite most of the colouring consisting of single flat shades. With the limited pixel count of the Nintendo DS and the tiny screen the developers were working with, it's safe to assume that they had to strike the right balance when it came to sizing the sprites relative to everything else. This would have been done in order to convey everything properly, which may have meant that certain maps and sprites had to take a hit to detail, and I think they achieved this balance almost perfectly. While the maps are quite small and sectioned off, they never felt too disjointed, and the variety within any given area was enough to smooth over the numerous transition screens. I'd hazard a guess and say the tiny map size is why the random encounter rate is so fucking high. It's typically about 10 to 20 steps between load zones, which is minuscule by most JRPG standards, so with an encounter rate any lower, you'd either have vastly underleveled Digimon, or you'd simply fly through the game. Perhaps this is the fault of designing a fairly girthy JRPG for the Nintendo DS, and while I'd say their fix was the best solution overall, it doesn't come without glaring flaws, and the primary one being combat initiation time. Whenever you're thrust into a random encounter, it loads in each Digimon individually and scans their data, much like Cyber Sleuth. The issue with this, however, is that each animation takes 3 seconds per Digimon to complete. With any battle consisting of between 1 and 5 enemies, this means that every single encounter takes between 3 and 15 seconds to commence. At the very end of my playthrough, I had defeated 2,254 Digimon. If we multiply that by 3 seconds, that's 112 minutes that I spent waiting for stupid animations to display a sprite. The battle area was designed in such a way that you can't fit the entire thing on screen at once, so individually showcasing the player what they're up against makes sense as you're feeding them critical information. Unfortunately, they overlooked the fact that on the other screen is a zoomed out overview of the battlefield, which makes up for the limitations of the main screen. Regardless of how they approach this, it's still a ridiculous amount of time. Cyber Sleuth may have come a decade later, but they fixed the issue by simply applying all the scan data at once as they showcase the enemy line, which means it's nowhere near as annoying or intrusive. I found similar issues with general clunk while inside most menus. Whenever you check a Digimon's stats, you can't shift between monsters with the L and R buttons, which serve no function in menu. This makes changing equipment or simply checking the Digivolution tree an absolute chore. Interestingly, the VPET elements are alive and well, and while they're completely overpowered and I adore them, the painfully bloated menus rear their heads here too. Moving Digimon between farms and the active party can take forever as you get sandwiched between slow menus. Redesigning the user interface around the touchscreen, like modern day Pokemon, would have made it much more tolerable. Also, moving Digimon out of the active party completely unequips them, which means that using sluggish menus prompts more sluggish menu use. It's a destructive, tedious cycle, and it could have been done significantly better. While menu interaction does suck, the farms are a fantastic addition, and a nice little break from the story with the added bonus of permanent stat increases for your monsters. Farms come in various forms which correspond to a type of Digimon. They always benefit one type and negatively impact another. For example, Beast farms grant a large boost to Beast, but penalise mechanical types. They can be upgraded to generate more food, house more bodies, or pay out more experience. Size upgrades also allow for the placement of more training equipment, which can be placed for your Digimon to exercise at their own leisure, or for you to make them buff as fuck. Said training equipment levels up after a set amount of in-game day cycles and increases in proficiency, and I think having an incentive to take your time with the game is a really nice touch. Food is tallied up daily, and each Digimon requires a certain amount of food. Defeating enemies in battle will grant you bits, which is currency, experience, of course, and food, which adds towards your total. This makes the farm sections almost entirely optional, as you're never short of food, which is fantastic if you're only focused on the JRPG elements. I'm not sure what happens if you let your monsters starve, because I'm a nice guy and couldn't be arsed testing it, but I'm sure it's hilarious. Making starvation a serious threat would have given the game a nice edge, but ultimately I think that would make the later parts of the game infuriating, as you'd be juggling too many elements. Conversing with Digimon on the farm can trigger menial tasks I'd struggle to call side quests, and they don't really do much for the game as a whole. There's about 60 of them, and other than giving you points which grant bonuses at set tiers, there's only 2 quests that really matter. The first can be accessed quite early, and it unlocks a later quest which leads to an endgame dungeon where you fight 7 evil Digimon. I was fortunate enough to unlock this through sheer luck, and as far as endgame content goes, it's quite shallow and throws you against a grind wall, but hey, it's something. Grind walls aren't too common, which is fantastic, as that was a huge criticism I've had of pretty much all the other Digimon games to date. Much like Cyber Sleuth, Digimon have a hard level cap which can be increased by reverting them to a prior evolutionary stage. Luckily, the level cap is typically just enough to get them to the next form, and you'll very rarely have to degenerate them. Degeneration is the process of de-digivolution and is actually explained quite well during a sticky story event. Fairly early in the game, you're confronted by an extremely powerful Digimon who you have no hope of beating. During a brief cutscene, he's forced to degenerate, which allows you to deliver a firm ass-pounding. Looking back, I have to say that the game's excellent in how it handles tutorials. After the opening few cutscenes, which go on for about 5 minutes give or take, and Agumon straight up tells you that there's shit you should know, and if you want to know it, you can talk to him. After that, you're given control of the protagonist and are completely free to ignore that little mustard-coloured fuck. That is a tutorial done well. The information's there if you need it, but if you don't want it, you don't have to have it. The story is also quite minimalistic. One day, while looking at furry porn on Internet Explorer 4, you get sucked into the digital world and then some powerful monsters tell you to become Tamer King because you'll be rewarded with good shit. That's the entire premise of the game. It's simple, it achieves its purpose, and I love it. The way the powerful Digimon dictate this to you is so cryptic that it actually had me interested in what rewards they were going to give me. Naturally, along the way, certain elements unfold which give you secondary motivations for continuing, but really, the promise of free shit is always going to trump saving the world. At a certain point, the game starts to focus on how shitty humans are and how easily their selfish desires turn to evil, then it pulls the whole Digimon can be evil too and extremism is bad wherever it comes from. This is pretty much what every Digimon game focuses on, so expect nothing new in that regard. Speaking of nothing new, the game reuses some audio tracks from Digital Card Battle, which is a nice nod to an underappreciated card game. Of all the Digimon games I've played thus far, Digimon World DS is what I consider the best combat system of the lot. While it is quite generic in terms of JRPGs, the addition of the experience types and the active reserve party system is enough to make it shine. When you defeat an enemy, you're given experience based on their type. For example, defeating an insect monster will grant you insect experience, while an aqua type will grant you aqua experience. Certain branches of the Digivolution tree require a set amount of any given type of experience. I think this is fantastic, as not only does it make experience gaining more interesting, but it also keeps you aware of what types of Digimon you're up against. Now, the active reserve party system I mentioned a second ago is similar to Cyber Sleuth, but it has a slight tweak to it, which I think makes it much better. You're given 5 slots in which to position 3 primary battle Digimon. What makes this interesting is that you have to factor in enemy attacks which target more than one space, but also that grouping your monsters closer together can grant you various stat bonuses. At any given point, you could be shifting between formations to either grant a buff or to avoid multi-space attacks. It's a small but important element to combat which gives it a slight edge over Cyber Sleuth. Now, with all that said, I just want to end on a couple of small things I couldn't jam into the body of the script. Maps contain little symbols which represent when a boss battle's coming up, and I'm really fond of these. I hate when I'm balls deep in a dungeon, barely hanging onto life, and I accidentally trigger a boss encounter. This gives me an opportunity to heal, check positioning, and all of that good shit. However, you can still encounter enemies in boss areas. This isn't a huge issue, but the amount of times I'd walk up to a boss only to be thrust into a random encounter was ridiculous. After you move past that boss symbol, random encounters should be disabled because they're nothing more than inconsistent annoyances. The difficulty of the game was nice and gradual, and I never felt the need to grind, until the final boss, that is. I had a party of 6 megas, and he one-shot them all, which prompted me to go away and grind for about 5 hours. I wouldn't mind being slaughtered by a tough enemy if I could go back and have a few more cracks at him with different strategies, but the final boss is behind an unskippable cutscene, which felt like it took forever. If I'm to be penalised with a tedious cutscene, I might as well invest that time in grinding, which will secure me my victory by making my numbers bigger instead of trying to think my way around the problem. Being the final boss and all, that left a really bad taste in my mouth. Just to close, Digimon World DS is the first game of the series I'd recommend to someone who wasn't a Digimon fan. It's a lovely, neat little JRPG with a few glaring flaws, but overall it's a solid product that could be great with a few small tweaks. I do genuinely wonder if Dusk and Dawn fixed these issues, but the next Digimon game I'll be covering will either be Digimon World Data Squad or the upcoming Digimon World Next Order, so we won't find out for about 40 years. There are only 4 more titles in the English Digimon RPG series I haven't covered, and I hope to cover the rest of the series before the end of 2017, so stay tuned for more of that furry shit. As always, let me know what you think in the comments. Did I fuck up or misrepresent the game in any way, or was I fair and the best sex you've ever had? Thanks for watching.